Okay, I need you to stay with me here because what I'm about to walk you through is genuinely unprecedented in American history, and I don't use that word lightly. I've said it before about things that turned out to be significant but manageable. This is different. At 3:14 this morning Eastern Time, a courier departed the Vice President's residence at the Naval Observatory. The courier was carrying two sealed envelopes, one destined for the Speaker of the House, the other for the President pro tempore of the Senate. Inside those envelopes was identical documentation, a single page, signatures from the Vice President and a majority of the sitting cabinet. And that document stated, in the formal language required by the Constitution, that the President of the United States is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. If you're just joining us right now, hit subscribe immediately. This is not a drill. This is not speculation. This is constitutional machinery activating in real time, and you need to understand exactly what's happening. Section 4 of the 25th Amendment has been invoked for the first time ever. But here's the thing. Here's where this goes from constitutional procedure into genuine crisis. The president is not accepting it. The president is not stepping aside. The president is, according to multiple sources inside the White House, physically barricaded in the residence, directing Secret Service to prevent the vice president from entering the grounds, and publicly declaring that what has happened is not a constitutional action, but an unlawful coup against a sitting president. Which means right now, at this moment, the United States of America has two people claiming to be commander-in-chief, two people issuing orders, two people asserting the authority of the presidency. And caught directly in the middle of that contradiction is the entire apparatus of American government, starting with the people who control the nuclear arsenal. All right. Before we go any further, we need to establish exactly what Section 4 of the 25th Amendment actually says and does, because there's a lot of confusion about this, and the confusion matters. The confusion is part of what's creating the crisis. Most people, when they think about the 25th Amendment, they think about presidential succession. The president dies, the vice president takes over. That's Section 1. Simple, clear, we've used it. Section 4 is something else entirely. Section 4 was written for a scenario that the framers of this amendment hoped would never actually occur. It was designed for the moment when a president is alive, is conscious, is asserting his authority, but the people closest to him, the vice president and the cabinet, have concluded that he cannot or should not continue to wield presidential power. Maybe he's had a stroke and can't communicate. Maybe he's undergone surgery and is incapacitated. Or, and this is the difficult part, maybe those around him have determined that his judgment has become so compromised, so dangerous, that the republic itself is at risk. Under Section 4, the vice president and a majority of cabinet members, that's 8 signatures, can transmit a written declaration to Congress stating that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. The moment, the instant, that declaration is received by congressional leadership. Presidential power transfers to the vice president, not after a vote, not after a hearing, not after judicial review. Immediately, like flipping a circuit breaker. That transfer occurred at 3:14 a.m. this morning. Constitutionally, legally, the vice president became acting president at that moment. But the Constitution also gives the president a countermove. If the president transmits his own written declaration to Congress asserting that he is able to serve, his powers are restored. Unless within 4 days, the vice president and cabinet send a second declaration disputing that claim. If they do, the whole thing goes to Congress for resolution. We are in the initial phase of this. The declaration has been delivered. The president has not yet submitted his counter-declaration. But sources say that letter is being drafted right now. Here's some history that matters. In October 1919, President Woodrow Wilson suffered a massive stroke. He was partially paralyzed, his speech was impaired, his cognitive function was significantly diminished. And for the remaining 17 months of his presidency, the American people were essentially lied to about the condition of their president. Wilson's wife, Edith Wilson, controlled access to him completely. She decided which documents reached him. She filtered which advisors could see him. She effectively made decisions on his behalf while maintaining the fiction that he was governing. When the truth eventually emerged, it horrified lawmakers. The idea that the presidency could be held hostage by a medical crisis, that there was no constitutional mechanism to address a president who was alive but incapable, became a genuine concern. That concern intensified after President Kennedy's assassination. What if Kennedy had survived Dallas but been left in a persistent vegetative state? What if a president suffered a heart attack during a nuclear crisis and couldn't communicate, but also couldn't be replaced? The 25th Amendment was ratified in 1967 specifically to address those scenarios. It was meant to ensure continuity of government. It was meant to ensure that the country would never be left without a functioning chief executive. But here's what the framers of that amendment assumed. They assumed good faith. They assumed that if the cabinet took the extraordinary step of declaring a president unable to serve, the president would recognize the gravity of the situation and cooperate with the constitutional process. They did not anticipate this. They did not anticipate a president who would look at the Constitution and declare that it doesn't apply to him. Smash that like button right now if you understand the stakes of what we're witnessing. This engagement matters. It determines whether this information reaches people who need to see it. Let me tell you what we're hearing from inside the White House right now. Multiple sources are describing a building in complete disarray. Staff members are openly weeping in hallways. Some are packing boxes. Others are feeding documents into shredders. The chief of staff, who reportedly refused to sign the Section 4 declaration, is now running a communications operation aimed at framing this entire event as an illegal seizure of power. Simultaneously, other aides are drafting executive orders designed to terminate every cabinet member who signed the declaration. The Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, the President wants them gone. And this creates a constitutional paradox that legal scholars have never had to resolve in practice. If the cabinet signed the declaration first, and presidential power transferred at the moment of delivery, can the president then fire those cabinet members? Do their signatures still count if they've been terminated? Or did they stop being his subordinates the instant that letter reached Capitol Hill? There is no precedent for this. There is no clear answer. The Constitution doesn't address it because the framers assumed no one would ever try to test it this way. What we have right now is a government existing in two contradictory states simultaneously. We have two command structures, two chains of authority, two people issuing orders that cannot both be legal. And nowhere is that contradiction more dangerous than in the realm of nuclear weapons. Stay with me here because this is where it gets genuinely terrifying. The President of the United States, wherever he goes, is accompanied by a military aide carrying a briefcase. You've seen it. The nuclear football. It contains the launch authentication codes, the materials required to authorize a nuclear strike. The Vice President also has a military aide with an identical briefcase. Under normal circumstances, the Vice President's codes are inactive. They're a backup. They only become operational if the President is confirmed deceased or formally incapacitated. At 3:14 this morning, when that Section 4 declaration was delivered, the Vice President constitutionally became acting President. By the text of the amendment, that means his launch codes should have activated at that moment, and the president's codes should have been deactivated. But who actually makes that determination? Who flips that switch? That decision runs through the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon. And according to sources, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is currently in the tank, the most secure conference room in the building, wrestling with a question that no chairman has ever had to answer. Which codes are legitimate? Whose orders does the military follow? If the president picks up the phone right now and orders a nuclear strike, does the military execute that order? Or do they refuse on the grounds that he is no longer commander-in-chief? If they refuse and they're wrong, they've just committed the most consequential act of insubordination in American history. If they comply and they're wrong, they've just followed an illegal order from someone who no longer holds presidential authority. And here's the thing about nuclear deterrence. It depends on certainty. It depends on adversaries knowing without question that American nuclear forces are under coherent command and control. The moment there's ambiguity, the moment there's visible confusion about who controls those weapons, deterrence degrades. Our adversaries are watching this right now. They are watching the American chain of command fracture in real time, and they are calculating. So why did the cabinet do this? Why invoke Section 4 tonight of all nights? According to a senior Justice Department official who has spoken to reporters, the cabinet convened in secret last night at the Naval Observatory after a specific incident earlier that afternoon. The details are still still emerging, and we need to be careful about what we report as confirmed versus what remains allegation. But multiple sources are pointing to the same series of events. The president allegedly issued a direct order for a military operation on American soil. Specifically, he allegedly ordered active-duty military personnel to seize voting machines in a swing state ahead of the upcoming election. The Secretary of Defense reportedly refused to transmit that order. The president allegedly threatened to fire him and proceed through alternative channels. And that, according to the people who signed that declaration, was the line. That was the moment when they concluded that the emergency mechanism existed for exactly this circumstance, that if they did not act last night, American soldiers might be deployed against American citizens by morning. This was not, in their view, a policy disagreement. This was not partisan gamesmanship. This was, they believed, the final guardrail, the emergency brake, the last resort that the 25th Amendment was designed to provide. The president, however, is telling a very different story. Despite aides reportedly attempting to confiscate his phone, he has been posting continuously on social media. He is claiming that a cabal of globalists has infiltrated his cabinet. He is framing the constitutional action as treason. He is calling his supporters to Washington. And that last part is what has law enforcement in a state of genuine alarm. Drop a comment right now. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this is reaching because people need to understand what's happening. The president posted a message a few hours ago. It read, "Come to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, protect your president." We are now seeing live feeds of crowds forming near the White House. People are arriving by car, by metro, on foot. Some of them are visibly armed. D.C. Metropolitan Police are overwhelmed. Requests for National Guard support have been transmitted. And here's where the constitutional crisis creates an operational nightmare. In Washington, D.C., unlike the states, the authority to deploy the National Guard belongs to the president. The district doesn't have a governor. The president controls the D.C. Guard. So if the vice president, who is constitutionally the acting president, orders the National Guard to secure the perimeter and protect federal buildings, and the president issues a counter order telling those same Guard members to stand down, whose command is lawful? Who do those soldiers obey? The man who was elected or the man who holds constitutional authority under the emergency provisions of the 25th Amendment? There is no manual for this. There is no training scenario. There is no precedent. Every commander, every soldier, every officer is now making individual judgments about which orders to follow. And the wrong choice in any direction could be catastrophic. Now let's talk about the Secret Service, because what's happening there might be the most immediate flashpoint. Secret Service agents are trained to protect the president. They build relationships over years. They develop personal bonds. They are conditioned to give their lives, if necessary, for the person they're assigned to shield. And now, overnight, they're being told that the man they've protected is no longer the president. They're being told that the vice president stationed across town is now their principal. According to sources, this contradiction has created an open rift inside Secret Service Command. The head of the Presidential Protective Detail is reportedly refusing to allow the vice president's security team onto White House grounds. His position stated plainly, "I take orders from the president. Until he leaves this building, no one comes in." Think about what that means. Armed federal agents, all Secret Service, facing each other across a perimeter. The president's detail on one side, the acting president's detail on the other, both sides believing they are following lawful orders. Meanwhile, the vice president is improvising. He cannot enter the Oval Office. He cannot access the Situation Room. He is attempting to conduct the business of the presidency from the Eisenhower Executive Office building next door, working from a conference room, coordinating with whatever cabinet members and staff will recognize his authority. The elected president holds the physical seat of power. The constitutional acting president holds the legal authority. And neither can dislodge the other without potentially triggering a confrontation that no one is prepared for. Subscribe right now if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell. You need to be here for what comes next because the constitutional clock is now running. Here's how this unfolds. According to the text of the amendment, the president has the right to send a written declaration to Congress stating that no inability exists, that he is able to discharge the powers and duties of his office. Sources indicate that letter is being drafted as we speak. The moment that letter is delivered to the Speaker and the President pro tem, presidential power snaps back to him immediately, just as it transferred away immediately when the Cabinet's letter arrived. But then the burden shifts. The Vice President and the Cabinet have 4 days to respond. If they transmit a second declaration reasserting that the President is unable to serve, power transfers back to the Vice President, and Congress is forced to act. Under the amendment, Congress must assemble within 48 hours. From there, they have 21 days to decide the question. And the threshold is extraordinarily high. To permanently remove the president requires a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate. If that threshold is not met, the president resumes his powers, which means we are potentially looking at 21 days of constitutional limbo, 21 days during which the legitimate holder of presidential authority is genuinely unclear, 21 days during which every executive order, every military deployment, every diplomatic communication exists in a gray zone of contested legitimacy. Markets are already reacting, futures are plunging, foreign capitals are in turmoil. One report indicates the British Prime Minister attempted to call the White House and was placed on hold for 20 minutes because no one could determine who was authorized to take the call. This is what systemic breakdown looks like. This is what Americans have watched happen in other countries and told ourselves it could never happen here. It's happening here. And there is a genuine risk, a real and present risk, that this turns violent. If the president continues urging supporters to mass at the White House, if those crowds attempt to breach the perimeter, if law enforcement or military personnel are caught between conflicting orders about whether to disperse them or protect them, we are no longer talking about a constitutional debate. We are talking about armed confrontation on American soil. We are talking about the possibility of Americans killing Americans over a disputed claim to the presidency. The Constitution was designed to flex under pressure. It has bent before. It bent during the Civil War. It bent during Watergate. It bent during contested elections. But it was never designed to be pulled this hard in this many directions at once. What we are witnessing right now is the American system of government at its breaking point. And the next decision by one person in one room will determine whether it holds. I am staying on this. I have feeds up on the White House, the Capitol, and the Pentagon. If the president transmits his counter-declaration to Congress, I will read it to you in real time. If the Joint Chiefs issue a statement, you will hear it here. If there is any movement at any of those 3 locations, we will be covering it live. Do not assume this resolves quietly. Do not assume the institutions will hold simply because they always have. Do not assume that guardrails which exist on paper will function when tested by someone willing to ignore them. The 25th Amendment has been invoked. The president is refusing to comply. 2 chains of command are asserting authority. Armed agents are facing each other. Crowds are gathering, and the world is watching. Like this stream. Share it. Send it to everyone you know. This is one of those moments where history pivots, where the future gets decided in real time. People need to see this. They need to understand what's happening to their country right now.